Good to go.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, everyone. This is Mark Pelka from Office of Policy and Management, Criminal Justice Policy and Planning. Apologize for a bit of a late start. That's my fault. I was experiencing some audio problems on my end, and perhaps that's reflective of the morning that many of us are having. Many of us in state government are experiencing a temporary service outage with email and website updates. So I guess I figured I would add to the predicament by my audio issues, but I hope you can hear me now. And I want to thank everyone from the Criminal Justice Policy Advisory Commission for joining today, and thank everyone who's following along on the live event stream, tracking our meeting. This is now the third meeting that we've held in a virtual means, and clearly there are still some hiccups that I'm experiencing, but I hope it's going smoother for everyone on the line. And thank you for making time this morning to come together. These times we're living through are inflection points, threshold moments. There are moments when you can feel the ground shifting under your feet. There are moments that demand of rushing to meet the moment that's in front of us. I'll touch a bit more on that later. And I want to give a quick overview of the agenda, and then I'll turn to the roll call for the members, just to make sure that since we are in a largely audio setting, everyone's able to indicate that they are on the line. This is the last meeting we'll be having for the next until September. So we're going to begin our annual two-month hiatus. And I wanted to acknowledge this is the third meeting that's been held not only virtually, but following the onset of the COVID-19 public health emergency, with a little bit of time to stop and reflect on what changes that emergency has wrought internationally, nationally, and in our state, and more to the purposes of our work within the criminal justice system. I proposed a series of discussions. 3 members of our division will be interviewing members of the commission to ask them to reflect on emerging effective criminal justice practices that occurred during the initial COVID-19 emergency response. We've been trying from a data perspective to provide real-time information wherever possible, to reflect changes as they were happening, to ask criminal justice system stakeholders to provide insights and reaction, knowing that they are directly on the front lines of the system. And then also, I thought in the discussions we would ask for insights on some perhaps durable policy or strategy, partnerships, practices that emerged from how service organizations and state agencies and local agencies and individuals have responded within the criminal justice system to the COVID-19 public health emergency. The demands that have been placed on agencies and organizations and individuals to react in real time to the challenges presented, I think has identified some effective new approaches to criminal justice and public safety that may be worth memorializing and for long term. So we will be fortunate to be hearing from the Department of Correction, the Board of Pardons and Paroles, the Alliance to End Sexual Violence, and I'm looking forward to engaging all members of the commission to the extent they wish to elaborate and share. I think this is a natural progression from the previous 2 meetings where we, in April, delved into a more kind of in-depth and, again, real-time depiction of changes in the criminal justice system. We presented a presentation on that and engaged in discussion with people who are on the front lines of the system. Last month in May, we brought in law enforcement executives from a variety of jurisdictions to provide their insights on how their work has changed, their operations have changed in reaction to the public health emergency. And I hope today, to the extent possible, there will be the ability to reflect on the last 3 months or so and look ahead to the future for how best to prepare for a potential resurgence of the virus and also for durable policy to make the system even more effective. So I'll go through the role just to bring everyone from the commission onto the call to participate, and then we'll proceed with the meeting. I'm wondering from the Department of Correction if anyone's on the line with us.
Hey, Mark. Good morning. This is Kiros in the office. I got Deputy Commissioner Sepalat, Deputy Commissioner Mulligan, and Director Martucci. I do have Director Ellison on the line. I have DA Sharonda Carlos on the line, and Director Gavin on the line, representing the Department of Corrections.
Oh, terrific. Well, thank you. I definitely will be, once we go through the roll, pausing for a bit just to react or reflect on some of the changes within the Department of Corrections since our last meeting. But just to allow everyone to speak and to join the meeting officially, I'll continue, sir. But thank you very much for your introduction of yourself and the members of your team. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
How from the Board of Pardons and Paroles? Chairman or Rich?
Yes, good morning. Rich Sparacco, Director of the Board of Pardons and Paroles, representing Chairman Giles today, who couldn't make it.
Well, we're glad you're here, Director Sparacco. Thank you for making the time. How about from Department of Emergency? Oh, absolutely. How about from DESP? Do we have a commissioner or Brian, perhaps? Okay. I know that some folks were indicating they might have to join late, so we'll hold that spot. However, from the Department of Public Defender Services, Attorney Rapillo?
Yes, I'm here. Good morning.
Good morning. Glad you're here, ma'am. How about Chief State's Attorney? Colangelo, are you on the line? Or DCJ?
I'm here.
Glad you're here, sir. Thank you. How about our friends at Demas? Dr. Norco?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Glad you're here, sir. And I think I heard from the State Department of Education, we might be joined by John Frassinelli, if we're lucky.
Yes, Mark. John Frassinelli, representing Commissioner Cardona and Deputy Commissioner Charlene Russell Tucker. Good morning.
Glad you're here, sir. We're sad that Charlene is unable to attend, but heartened by your presence. Thank you. How from CJPAC? Do we have a director on the line?
Yes, this is Humayun Beg. I'm online.
Mr. Beg, glad you're here, sir. How about from DCF, Department of Children and Families?
Yeah, hi, good morning, Mark. It's Vinny Russo. Good morning, everyone.
Vinny, so glad you're here. Thank you. Commissioner Sadi, I'll allow you to introduce yourself again, sir, and let me repeat myself in saying welcome back to your leadership of the department. We're so happy you're here, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And Tom Sadi, Commissioner of Veterans Affairs. This is my first meeting in 6 months after completing a military mobilization. It was not overseas, but was in a fairly hot zone in New York State for the past 6 months. I've been back since early June. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good to be here.
Well, we're fortunate as a country and as a state, and certainly among our neighbor states, to the leadership you provided in that capacity, sir. Really grateful to hear that, and we're just couldn't be happier to have you back. And I did hear that Commissioner Revelle is on the line, just could not speak, but I think now he's able to participate. I know that the judicial branch had a earlier commitment, and I'm not sure if anyone is on the line, but just want to give them a chance to say hello if they are.
Hi, this is Lori Deneen.
Oh, Ms. Deneen, so glad you're here, ma'am. Thank you.
I just wanted to let you know. Thank you. I'll be sitting in.
Oh, my pleasure. Oh, so happy you're here.
Mine as well. Thank you.
Oh, our pleasure. Chief Kinney, Vernon Police Department.
Good morning, Mark. I'm here.
So glad you're here, sir. Thank you. How about Attorney Pierre from Office of Victim Assistance? Okay. And how about from the Coalition Against Domestic Violence, Ms. Jarmock?
I'm here. Thank you.
So happy you're here, ma'am. And how about Beth Hamilton, Director of the Alliance to End Sexual Violence?
Good morning, Mark. I'm here.
Oh, so happy you're here. Thank you. Dr. Cho, Coalition to End Homelessness, are you on the line, sir?
Yes, I am. Good morning.
Oh, so glad you're back. Thank you for joining. And how about Attorney Healy? Okay. Anyone else I missed from the introduction? Okay. Well, great. I distributed the minutes from the May 28th meeting. I'm wondering if anyone has any concerns or questions about the draft minutes?
Mark, this
Could I ask?
I just sent you a few minor corrections to the Demas report. I don't think it's anything anyone should be worried about in terms of approving the minutes, but I just wanted to get the numbers correct.
Certainly, sir. If the commission would allow, I'd be happy to make those technical changes to the data included and reflect them in the final minutes. If the commission would allow me too, I can receive your changes, Dr. Norco, make those and reflect them in the final minutes as I post them. Would any member of the commission have concerns about giving me that authority to make those revisions as Dr. Norco sends them and reflect them in the final minutes?
No.
Okay, thank you. I'm asked for a motion to accept the minutes as amended.
Mark, I'd make a motion to accept as amended.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you, Chief Kinney. How about a second?
Hey, Mark, I'll give a second. Rich Sparacco.
Thank you, Director. Appreciate it. Okay, minutes have been accepted. Terrific. I did want to, so I'll be turning to the monthly indicators report shortly, but I did want to just pause and reflect. Just, you know, I have the privilege to convene really inspiring leaders from across Connecticut's criminal justice system, in government and in the community. And so I feel that each Thursday of the last Thursday of the month is my chance to come together with you. I learn from you every week, every month. I think that you provide information about the work you do. You provide and establish partnerships and collaboration with one another. I feel like that's the privilege I have of my job, to have in some ways my finger on the pulse. But I think with your finger on the pulse, you appreciate just the immense impact that has been felt by people in our state and people around the country, and indeed people around the world, with the recent events that have been captured and that have launched protests, that have launched pushes for policy change, that have reflected trauma, anguish, heartbreak, and suffering in the souls of the people of our country, and also the soul of our country itself. And I think more than ever before, I've become conscious of who I am and regarding demographics and privilege and status and everything. And it makes me uncomfortable even to speak up about the moment that we are in, but I know that it would probably feel wholly inappropriate to not acknowledge that since our last meeting, there was the high-profile tragic events that have occurred across our country. The one that I think stands out for many of us was the murder of George Floyd that was captured on video, and many have seen. Vinny, your commissioner at the Department of Children and Families, noted on a Juvenile Justice Policy Oversight Committee meeting I attended that the individual who recorded the video of George Floyd's last minutes of life was a 17-year-old young woman. And when I saw the commissioner share that, my heart tore again, because you think about the trauma that was experienced. And I was reading about the moment that George Floyd's brother, Terrence Floyd, returned to the site where George Floyd was murdered, and he spoke on a megaphone, and that captured his words, but it also captured his breathing. And I think to return to a site where his brother breathed his last breaths was a moment that really tore me. And I was reading that a moment occurred during Mr. Terrence Floyd's remarks when a pastor stood behind him and put his hand on his shoulder and repeated the words "breathe" to steady him. And those words being the ones that were uttered to try to reassure and support from a faith leader to a man in grief. And the word breathe, breath was, I thought, really hard and painful to hear. And I'm trying really hard to lean in to the comfort that I need to feel and acknowledgement, also the discomfort and pain that I need to appreciate and to apply to my life every day that I do this. And I know that because I know I work with many of you in various capacities outside of CJPAC. I've heard your calls for improvement and your reflections of grief and trauma, and I thank you all for that. And I think that there are lessons to learn and to apply in every capacity that we work in. And is the role I play in CJPAC, I'd like to help to support that work as well. I've been privileged to be part of a variety of efforts since the high-profile tragic event involving George Floyd and others, and whether it's policy being developed, whether it's grants being administered, whether it's convenings occurring, whether it's conversations within our division and action steps to take place. So I think it's important to acknowledge this and to lean into the moment. And whether it is in the data that we analyze, ensuring that we are including demographic information, whether it's reflecting the communities across our state and the different and disproportionate disparate effects that occur, whether it's promoting collaboration to better serve people in our state with an eye toward the lives that have been lost. I think that's very important. So I did write down some things I wanted to share, but I really in the moment didn't think it was appropriate for me to read. So I apologize for, just speaking from the cuff and the heart, but I did want to share that. And I know that many of you are probably, I know that many of you are feeling, I know that all of you are feeling many of the things that I am as well. So I would invite anyone who wishes to share anything, any reflections, you're more than welcome to now. If you'd rather keep your sentiments to yourself, I respect that. If you wanted to reflect on it later in the call, that's also appropriate. But I did want to acknowledge the moment and invite anyone wishing to speak to be given that opportunity. Okay. Well, thank you, and I know that we have many separate conversations, and you are on a whole variety of different efforts to on this moment. I'll turn to the monthly indicators report, and I think our website is now updates are being made, and the report will appear on our website. This helped me to reflect on the insights that our law enforcement executive shared on the previous meeting, especially the insights that Chief Kinney shared regarding the trends in arrests, arraignments in courts, and pretrial admissions to the Department of Correction. April was perhaps the most striking month in terms of changes in the criminal justice system. There was a bit of a rebound in many categories in May, although they remain significantly below trends the prior year. So arrests reached a historic low in April. They rebounded, jumping 87% in May. They're still a quarter below the levels they were last year, but it's an indication that in the month of April and May, now in June, societal activity is picking up and activity is increasing on the front end of the criminal justice system. Arraignments at courts and pretrial admissions to the DOC also underwent similar changes as the arrest did. And even though the number of pretrial admissions to the DOC ramped up, there were only 2 people admitted into the sentence population in DOC in the month of May. So consistent with the court mitigation plan, as you would expect in April and May, there were next to zero admissions into the sentence population. The pretrial population, however, began to tick up, went up about 3% over that time period. So I think it'll be important for us in the coming months to look at those front-end indicators to see what signals they're sending and discuss them and to prepare for the further reopening of the criminal justice system. I would share that there is one reflection or indication of just how the system has adapted. That's on page 2, chart 2A in the monthly indicators report. There are 2 categories of release that we track on a monthly basis regarding the release from DOC at the pretrial stage among the accused population. It's the did not return from court, which it consists of people who are diverted to programs or sentenced to time served, as well as bonded out, which are people who are transitioning from corrections to the community, likely with conditions imposed by the court after posting their bond. Both, I would note that they did not return from court, really cratered in the months of April and May in comparison to the previous years. They fell 42% and 92% respectively compared to the prior year. And that would be expected with the reduction in court activity. A new category emerged in our tracking called release by court order. And that's an interesting reflection of ways that CSSD, or the judicial branch, the chief state's attorney, the chief public defender worked in concert to collect electronic records of people held pretrial, to review them and to provide information to the respective attorneys in courthouses around the state to enable activity to continue flowing, to review those cases, determine suitability for an adjustment of bond, for a placement onto a pretrial supervision capacity, or to remain in the community, incarcerated. And those parties worked collaboratively through bond amount levels, increasing with each round of review, and kept flow happening, which I would argue positions our state more effectively for the inevitable or rapid increase in system activity in the month of June and the coming months. So we appreciated being able to describe a bit of the work and show data to reflect it among those parties. And I would definitely invite anyone wishing to share any further information about it now or during our discussion. I'd be happy to hear it. I would also note that Chief Kinney's insights on the last call concerned the ways that we track arrests. We track them regarding arrests that are docketed by the courts, and so I would just we're going to be mindful of different ways we can track as we monitor those front end system indicators for the flickers that might occur in the light, because the chief indicated that in many jurisdictions there are people who might not be appearing as a docketed arrest, but might have activity pending once court activity does resume. The prison population forecast section, I would note that Connecticut is on a really impressive trajectory that began long before I began in my role. Over the last 12 years, there has been a number of broader system trends regarding arrest and reported crime, as well as changes in policy and practice, application of budget, partnerships, introduction and expansion of diversion and treatment options, tracking of data in the way that our group does, that have contributed to very favorable trends in the correction population. And the correction population has decreased by 48% since February of 2008, which is the historic high for our state. Nationally, that puts us into proximity to the Cut 50 movement, which is a national call for jurisdictions to reduce in half safely correction populations. And I don't think that our entire work was motivated in pursuit of that. In fact, I think this was the effort that we pursued as a state toward improving public safety outcomes to produce the secondary effect of reductions in the correction population. But it's important that we report on these trends as they are occurring. And we are, as of this morning, within 90 people of reaching the 50% milestone. And I think that's worth tracking and delving into and understanding and monitoring to avoid future backsliding, to double down on efforts that are effective to improve public safety outcomes and make sure that correction resources are being used most effectively on people who present the greatest risk and have committed the greatest harm. So that is also an item in our report I wanted to share. I'll be preparing to turn to the discussion piece, but did want to allow anyone who would wish to weigh in at this point on any of the topics covered so far in the monthly or otherwise. Okay. Well, great. Well, I would say that now we're turning to the discussion sections, and I would note that you're going to be benefiting from hearing from other members of the division that I work in. And I think to many of you that will be a good relief because we've got some really talented staff. And so I've paired members of our division with each of the three presenters that we'll be hearing from. We're going to spend about 20 minutes on each of the three, and that will leave some time for either during the agency updates or additional discussion, insights from you and questions from across our agencies and organizations. I hope this discussion will be both helpful to gain more insights into ways agencies and organizations adapted to COVID-19, but also opportunities for partnership or good ideas to apply within your respective agencies or organizations. So I'll list out the three right now so you know who you'll be hearing from. Kyle Bowdwin from who runs our research unit will kick off the first conversation. We'll be hearing from the Department of Correction, specifically the Community Release Unit, which provided the standardized risk and need assessments and data, a review of people eligible for transition to the community, as well as Director Eric Ellison from our Parole and Community Services Division regarding the Halfway House Network and Community Service Network in our state. After that, you'll hear from Eleanor Michael, our Assistant Division Director, who will be interviewing Director Spracco from the Board of Pardons and Paroles. And that will be a chance to hear about technology, live streaming, live streaming of parole hearings, eventually pardon hearings, ways that policies like the expedited review of cases of pardons helped the board to adapt and to apply technology to manage operations during the disruption caused by COVID-19. And then Melissa Conway, who's a planning analyst and administers our federal grants serving victims and survivors, will be interviewing Beth Hamilton from the Alliance Against Sexual Violence regarding ways victims' services adapted, how victims' pursuit of rights and communication and information and services were attended to through adaptations by the Alliance. So Kyle, I this morning I asked you to start it off, and I think you'd be a terrific leader for us in getting the conversation going. And I would turn to you, sir. I know this is a DOC, and the divisions we'll be talking to are ones that you've spent a lot of time on. And actually, I just read a note and recognized I made a bit of an oversight. So if you've spared just a little more time, I've taken up a lot of personal privilege time at the beginning. I wanted to acknowledge that since our last meeting, we also learned of the resignation of our Corrections Commissioner, Ron Cook. He unfortunately is unable to join us today. I learned that from his staff because of a conflict that he has. But I know I'd be remiss if I didn't reflect on the privilege I had getting to work with him. And I feel very lucky to call him both a colleague and a friend. He's probably the first commissioner I met when I started, and he could not have been more inviting. When I learned of his departure, I described him as an oak tree. He's really strong, and he holds up a lot of branches and leaves, and he loves to represent the people who work on the front lines of corrections every day. But he's also someone who gives support and nurturing, and I felt that way toward him. And I'm going to miss him wherever he lands next. I know he'll be heavily sought after. He's a corrections leader, and I'm going to miss him. My heartbreak is comforted by the individual who is serving in the interim commissioner role. That's Angel Quiros, who introduced himself earlier. I'm still trying to get titles right. I'll refer to him as acting commissioner. And I know acting commissioner Quiros has over 30 years of experience in corrections throughout the system, and the department is in very good hands, both with him in that capacity and with the leadership team that's been assembled and the people who work across corrections every day. So as we turn to DOC for the first section, I did want to make sure I acknowledge that. And I'll turn to you, Kyle, and invite you to get started, please.
Sure. Thank you very much, Mark. I'll try to set the bar low for the remaining presenters and keep it breezy. But I think you brought some really interesting points out about the historical perspective in the prison population and the facility population in particular, where we're flirting with the 10,000 mark of a level of population that hasn't been seen at the Connecticut Department of Corrections since the late 1990s. And interestingly, I think that coincides closely. Acting Commissioner Quiros can correct me when he started. So he's seen the full ebb and flow of the prison population over the last several decades. But and a lot of that change has happened. There's been a really precipitous drop since the beginning of COVID, and a reflection of that is the many of the modifications and changes the Department of Correction has made to its policies and procedures within its walls. But I think what's often gets overlooked is the fact that the community population of the Department of Correction has grown steadily in this time, and now comprises nearly a third of the total supervised population by the Department of Correction. And it's closing in on the 5,000 mark as it increments up, in direct contrast to the way that the facility population has been sliding down. And we're lucky today to have some people who work on the back end of that system, the prison system, to discuss some of the changes that they've seen in the work that they do and the way the Department of Correction has has adapted to a public health pandemic. We have Gavin Galligan, the director of the Community Release Unit, to discuss some of the ways that his unit has changed and modified its practices, as well as Director Eric Ellison of the Parole and Community Services Unit. And I think having the two of them discuss the ways that their different units have interacted and have changed practices will be really enlightening. I think it makes sense for us to start in the way the process flows. The logical sequence is that the Community Release Unit is responsible for the review and the package oversight for risk assessments for people who are eligible for release, and then the Parole and Community Services is responsible for overseeing that actually the release and then the subsequent supervision of those individuals. And I think, Gavin, I'd like to pull you in first, and I think it would be interesting for you to discuss sort of how the Community Release Unit was originally set up, and also how it was established is particularly advantageous to address a public health crisis like COVID-19, and then ways you guys have also adapted your practices to even increase those efficiencies even more, and to make sure that you guys are touching every possible candidate for release. And yeah, I guess I'd transition there and ask you that question, Gavin.
Good morning, everyone. Gavin Galligan here again, Director from the Community Release Unit. I want to thank the Commission for the opportunity to speak and share today a little bit about our work at the Community Release Unit. So I'm going to kind of jump in my time machine here and bring us back to 2012. That's when the agency actually first started with our case notes system that turned our historical paper process of reviewing individuals on paper to an electronic process. And that really opened up opportunity for the agency to track, monitor, and review cases at that time. Something I used to joke, they used to look on people's desks for community release packages if they were on vacation. Now we can see real time where those cases are at all time. And so we've had that technology implementation, like I said, since 2012, which has really helped the agency. We took it a step farther. We had the opportunity in 2014, in February of that year, to participate in the lean event. And we actually came up with the idea of the Community Release Unit, which took the 15 decision makers, the wardens each of the facilities, down to one decision maker. We really looked at the efficiencies, what we could drive out of the case note system now that we had the technology, and we took out several layers of review that would happen in the process of the facility, and turned it to just that centralized decision maker. We didn't realize at the time how much it would help us, obviously, during the COVID time. If the process was like it was historical, I don't think we would have been able to review all the cases we did in a timely manner. It would have taxed the facility wardens with even more responsibility in light of this crisis. So really that historical change in the agency has really helped out not only through the years, but definitely during this time. So we opened our doors in March 30th of 2015, and since then we've reviewed, and I looked at this morning, 47,171 cases, which is quite phenomenal in that just over 5-year time frame. We have 4 counselors in our unit, 2 counselor supervisors, a secretary for clerical, and myself as the director. I often joke that we're small but we're mighty, because we are a small unit, and we do focus primarily just on community release, and it's something we take very seriously. So that's a little bit of our historical perspective, and without the case note system, and we really wouldn't have the ability like we've had to track all these cases and who's eligible and where they are in the process, and to try and also track things as far as internal holds, programming. There's other components that come into not just the review, but the process as a whole. So in regards to COVID, we did several things that really helped the agency and with public safety, and also with trying to promote social distancing by for safe releases. We through the statute authority given to the commissioner under furloughs, we increased and actually proposed the policy change that was signed off by Commissioner Cook to grant reentry furloughs to transitional supervision at 40%. So our transitional supervision is normally 50% eligibility. So we were able to take some of those offenders that were already approved and connect them into the community sooner. We also looked at a lot of programming that we had continued individuals for addiction services, other facility-based programming, and we looked at each of those individual cases to determine if they had completed other programs, if they were suitable for release, what their home plan was. So we had reviewed some of those cases again and approved them for discretionary release. We also looked at some other internal policies that we had, such things as requiring police reports for our DUI offenders, which are nonviolent offenders. We had historically required those police reports. We decided to waive those police reports, again, in the interest of processing and releasing cases. Again, we coordinated with our Parole and Community Services Division on that. And we also coordinated with our Addiction Services Unit and also MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, in regards to our programming requirements for DUI, home confinement release. And we're able to modify some of our requirements and also try and connect offenders to services in the community as best we could for each individual one of those cases. So we looked at those things. We also looked at, this is actually a rather large increase, offenders that were going to be released on transitional supervision, didn't have a home plan or a sponsor, so they would require placement in one of our halfway houses. We went back to each of those offenders at the facility level and met with them, provided them additional phone calls to try and get a sponsor so that way they could go to a safe home, not take up one of our community beds, which are so critical. And we actually yielded about a 20% increase of offenders who did not have sponsors were able to come up with sponsors. And we continue to do that with this population to try and make sure that they can try and reestablish with family or friends and try and get a home plan in place. The other thing is that I want to mention that we really take victim safety very seriously in all of our reviews. The voice of the victim is critical. We coordinate with our victim services unit here in the department and make sure that all these reviews are done safely for people that we are pairing with supervision in the community. So it's kind of a history lesson. Some of the things we did in response to COVID, like I said, without the technology, without the ability to track cases and process things in a timely manner, we've really been able to process cases in as little as a day, as long as we have all the information that we need. Historically, I think we've looked at it, and it would take as many as like 60 days for review prior to our unit coming online, and now we're down to about 20 days or less for that review to take place, which is very significant. It processes things and cuts things down and prioritizes things, but also as far as the offender's perspective and waiting for a response, that anxiety has also been cut down as well. So that's kind of a synopsis of my unit.
That's awesome. Thanks so much, Gavin. I really appreciate you walking us through that. And it's actually a really good transition time, I think, to pivot to Parole and Community Services as you walked us all the way through up until that review process. And I'm just curious, Director Ellison, if you could give us a little bit of insight into the ways that PCS changed its policies and practices regarding COVID-19 and anything you think that might be durable as we proceed into the next phases of our response to this pandemic.
Good morning, Kyle. Good morning, Mark. Good morning to all the members of the Commission. I am Eric Ellison, the Director of Parole and Community Services. We're a division within the Department of Correction, and we're charged with the release and supervision of any offender released under the Commissioner's authority and also the Board of Pardons and Parole, so those approved for release under the chair. We also supervise a small number of interstate cases through the Interstate Compact. And Kyle, I heard you mention we are approaching 5,000 under supervision in total in the community. About 1,000 of those individuals reside in contracted halfway houses in 29 halfway houses or programs across the state. Primarily work release programs. We do have some houses dedicated to specialized populations. So our release process has evolved over the years, just as that of crew. We recognized many years ago that we needed to centralize the release process. So we have a centralized organizational structure, just like crew, for the majority of releases. So any offender going from a correctional facility to a sponsor, and also from a halfway house to a sponsor, those cases are managed by a unit that we've named the Central Intake Unit. And they work very closely with crew. They work very closely with the board. They receive those cases via the case note system. So that was certainly a very favorable development, the establishment of case notes, the integration of case flow from the board, from the community release unit. We also have another unit that we centralized recently, and it's called the Residential Intake Unit, and that unit is charged with filling all of our halfway house beds and maintaining.
With your head pressed down. Okay.
But that big close.
Oh, excuse me.
This is so that gets rid of. This is Mark jumping in. I'm not sure if there's some feedback coming, and sometimes that happens when phones maybe need to be muted or something. I'm not sure what's happening to the director's phone, but just wanted to ask people to please mute if you're not participating, and please feel free to unmute and jump in when you need to. And sorry, director, I'm not sure where that feedback's coming from, but please feel free to proceed.
Oh, I apologize. Is it coming from my phone? Should I call in again, or?
No, we can hear you loud and clear.
Oh, okay, great.
Some feedback elsewhere, but I could. Nothing was really affected. I just could hear the background, and it was, but I think everything you're doing is great. We can follow along well.
Oh, very good. Thank you. So we recognized early on, in very close collaboration with crew, with the board, that there would be an increase in approved cases, in eligible and appropriate cases that we would look to release in a very timely and efficient manner. Centralizing our release process many years ago, and as I said, refining it, even within the last few years, allowed us to ensure that we had accountability with cases, that there was an efficiency with regard to releases. It supports tracking of cases, data collection for those cases, and we approached it really from a surge perspective. So we knew there would be waves of cases that would become eligible in a very short period of time, and we redeployed staff. We were fortunate to have about a dozen parole officers that were in training, newly hired parole officers. Some of them had worked in the Central Intake Unit. They were internal promotions, or they'd worked in the Residential Intake Unit. So they were the perfect fit to support this a surge in releases. And we focused efforts, considerable efforts, to release in a timely manner, to release to the community. We also contacted sponsors. We benefited from the work that had been done by crew and the facilities in contacting sponsors and developing those opportunities for supportive, suitable family or friends, or whomever we would determine to be appropriate. So we conducted those investigations and would move cases out in a very timely manner. Another approach was moving cases out of our halfway houses into the community and filling those beds with offenders that had no suitable release plan. So we were attempting to maximize that case flow as well. Also, while I have to mention, certainly dealing with the emerging COVID crisis, at one point we had to suspend releases to the halfway houses, and this was done to allow the programs to develop quarantine space, isolation space, so we could maintain continuity of operations for those programs. mitigate spread in the programs. We undertook numerous measures with our parole offices, with our halfway houses to mitigate spread, to maintain operations. We know how critical those programs are. There were times when some of the program releases to the programs had to be suspended early on because of outbreaks in the programs, because there were numbers of offenders under quarantine status or in isolation. In a very short period, go ahead, Kyle.
I was going to ask, was there a particular, I know this might be a little bit in the weeds, but was there a particular release mechanism that you guys began using or adapted to its use to help with the halfway house situation to move more offenders?
So with regard to the new release mechanisms, reentry furlough to transitional supervision was a big reason we were able to increase releases. Also, the board and their approval of transfer parole for a number of cases as well. We were focusing on both of those types of cases from our release authorities. We've also, for many years now, have utilized, under the Commissioner's authority, transitional placement to be able to release individuals from halfway houses when there's no other release consideration. So they're in a halfway house on community release status. That status doesn't allow us to place them in a community residence or some of our scattered site housing. We have approximately 172 scattered site housing beds that we contract for across the state, and we utilize those beds for folks that don't have a suitable release plan, that are parole, approved for parole or special parole, or transitional placement. So we undertook a similar approach as crew did in the facilities, in really trying to reach out to sponsors. We rallied our parole officers that oversee the halfway houses. We rallied the halfway house providers to reach out and contact potential sponsors, and we were able to move. To date, we've moved approximately almost 800 offenders out of the halfway houses since March 1st into appropriate, suitable community residences. So that we took a similar approach, contacting sponsors or moving individuals that were appropriate into our scattered site housing. We also, while we were reviewing, in line with what Gavin described, reviewing our full statutory authority, we also began using more fully and readily, for appropriate cases, reentry furlough to special parole. So that's a status that's a release authority granted to the Commissioner of Correction. So when there's no other release consideration, when somebody has been in a halfway house for a period of time and they're deemed suitable, they've met the requirements, the criteria to be moved out into a residence, we wanted to utilize that status as well.
Well, it sounds like between you and between the work done at PCS and the work done at Crew, you guys really went into what your statutory authority was and where you were more conservative in terms of, historically as an agency, and tried to use risk assessment tools and other methods that, now that we have the benefit of some scientific evaluation of different offenders, and transition those people safely, always keeping in mind public safety and other considerations when making those release decisions. And I really appreciate your time, you and Gavin, today with sharing the ways that you've transitioned and adapted it in this particular time in history. You mentioned, Eric, some issues with some ways that the board has worked with you, and I think that makes for a really good transition to our next presenter. Eleanor Michael is going to be discussing with Rich Baracco some ways that the board has adapted in this time of crisis. And I don't want to step on our MC's toes, Mark, but I think it's a good time to pivot over to Eleanor. Eleanor, you on the line?
I am. Thanks so much, Kyle. Hi, everybody. Again, my name is Eleanor Michael, and I'm Assistant Director of the Criminal Justice Policy and Planning Division at OPM. And today I'm going to be talking with Rich Sparacco, who is the Executive Director of the Board of Pardons and Paroles, who we all know and love. You know, the board has done a lot of things to change the way that they do work during the COVID-19 pandemic. And we will by no means be able to get to all of them today, but what I'd like to hear from Rich about is a little bit more about their public-facing work. So specifically their parole hearings and their pardon hearings. So I just want to start the conversation with a discussion about the parole hearings that are conducted. I know, Rich, that before the pandemic, you utilized video conferencing in a limited way to conference in individuals who are in the custody of the Department of Corrections for purposes of the hearings that were otherwise held in person at your facility in Waterbury. So in a way, you were sort of better positioned to transition to sort of telework because you already utilized video conferencing in that very limited way. But I think you still were confronted with some challenges, particularly technological challenges, in making sure that the public and victim advocates and others who needed to participate in these hearings were able to. So I was hoping you could start out by telling us a little bit about the challenges and impediments you faced in conducting these parole hearings after the stay-at-home orders were issued in mid-March, and what adjustments you've made to sort of address those challenges.
Good morning, Eleanor, and good morning, Commissioners, Mark, and everybody out there. And thank you for that introduction. And before I get to that, I do just want to, since we segued from the Department of Corrections to the Board of Pardons and Paroles, I do want to thank the department for doing such an incredible job. You know, although the board does have jurisdiction of about 74% of the people in the community, we are responsible just for the actual release or setting the conditions. It's really the work of the Parole and Community Services Division who gets them out. And we've worked collaboratively. We've seen such a dramatic increase of how people have been able to get out through sponsors, as previously mentioned. So I just want to do a quick shout out because it's because of our collaborations that this is all happening. With that said, we always have had some challenges in terms of our technology at the board, and many others would agree, just even working for state agencies. The board used to have in-person hearings at all the correctional facilities. We converted over a lot of those hearings around 2011, actually a little bit before that, 2008, and then fully moved up to video conference hearings by 2012. Currently, before the pandemic started, all of our hearings were done via video conferencing. Now, what this means is that instead of inmates or offenders who are incarcerated having to be moved to different facilities, to different hearings, and our board members actually traveling to the facilities, our board members actually were able to convene in a panel of 3, as they do for all hearings, at our office in Main Street in Waterbury. And we would connect via video into the facilities to conduct these hearings. So they were done over a live stream streaming format where the board would be able to interview the offenders who are incarcerated. And in terms of our process, we are a public agency and our hearings are open to the public. So we have to be able to have members of the public be part of this process. With that said, the board created public viewing rooms at our agency's main office. So members of the public would come to our office and they would be able to attend these hearings via these video connections. They didn't sit in the same room with our board members, but they were able to sit in this public viewing room and watch the hearings. And at any one time, we could have up to 3 hearings going, connecting to 3 different institutions with a total of 9 of our board members. And people in the public viewing room were able to watch these hearings as they all took place. When the pandemic struck, we lost the ability of having the public being able to enter into a state facility, our building, and watch these hearings. Without that, we would not be able to conduct hearings any longer. You know, the governor put out, specific executive orders in regard to how we were to, maintain public hearing processes. So we had to figure out and had to adapt because we didn't want to shut hearings down. And I do want to mention that, since the pandemic struck, we've remained 100% fully operational. A credit to all my staff and a credit to all our board members who, for the most part, are in our office every single day. Some are able to telework, but our staff have been working 100% of the time since the pandemic struck. So we had to challenge. We had to figure out how do we still get how do we have these public hearings and still make them available to the public? So what we did is we rented some equipment. It was a short-term fix. We have a long-term solution in place, and we could talk about that as well. A short-term fix that we were able to get some equipment to still do our video connections to the facilities into our main office, but also then to be able to live stream these hearings on our website. So at any given day, you can go to our website, and on our website, you can see a link to every single hearing or every single board meeting that is taking place. And right now I'm speaking specifically to parole hearings. We actually do a lot of other types of hearings outside of parole hearings. We do different reviews, medical parole, compassionate parole, early parole discharge reviews. This is all the activity that takes place on a daily basis at the board. So we are able to live stream these hearings right now. It will also create a challenge for other members who would have to come to the board's office to participate in these hearings. Specifically, I'm talking to the victim community. We have 2 victim advocates who are assigned to the board by the Office of Victim Services to represent all victims who have a right to appear and testify in either the granting or opposition of release. So the Office of Victim Services was able to come up with a plan to connect all their victims via by video conferencing into these hearings as well. So that was the immediate solution that we did for our parole hearings. It has been an ongoing challenge, but we were able to step up to that challenge with this solution. And it is our hope that as we move forward, we're going to be turning all our hearings over to this virtual video platform. And that's kind of what we did on the parole side. On the pardon side, we also had the ability to have expedited pardons, which petitioners don't actually have to.
Can I jump in really quickly before you? Can I jump in real quickly before you move to pardons
absolutely.
with a couple of questions on the parole side? Thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
No, not at all.
On the parole side, are you anticipating? It sounds like, from a non-tech savvy person's perspective, that through the borrowing of equipment and sort of the layering of multiple technologies on top of each other, you've been able to achieve this goal of continuing the hearings. Is that right? Because you're video conferencing in from the facilities, you're video conferencing in the victim advocates, and then you're also live streaming on the website. Do I understand that correctly?
Correct.
That's great. That's great. And so is this something that you plan to continue going forward even after the state reopens, whenever that may happen?
Absolutely. I mean, we do not know what the future is going to bring, especially with all the reports. And I think, Mark had mentioned, what may be upon us in the fall. So we have to have a plan moving forward. Even if the state does reopen, it could shut down again. Not that anybody wants that to happen. But we also take into account that, we're bringing in large amounts of people into our office for these hearings on a daily basis, all coming into one video room to watch hearings, sitting side by side. That may not be the best way to proceed given what's happened in this pandemic. So we're looking at a way to permanently live stream our hearings so that, that the public can watch, can listen in, and those who need to attend the hearings can attend these hearings virtually.
That's great. That's great. And it sounds like that might help remove some impediments that people otherwise might have had, whether it's with transportation, getting actually to your facility in Waterbury, whether it's with childcare concerns, other things. Now, going forward, people will be able to access them on the website. So that seems like a silver lining to this crisis, which is really wonderful. I know you were planning on pivoting to the pardons hearings before I so rudely interrupted you. I know we created this expedited pardons process in 2015. It seemed like not so long ago, but now that I'm thinking about it, it's already been 5 years that it's been in place. I know with the expedited pardons process that it's a way for you to conduct sort of pardons hearings with no requirement that the applicant appear in person. So this, on its face, seems to lend itself more to this pandemic situation because there is no such requirement of that person appearing physically. Have there been any changes to that process over the past 3 months?
There haven't been any changes. We've continued on with expedited pardons, just as we've continued on with all our other type of reviews. Keep in mind, though, that all these reviews and expedited pardons is an administrative review. We still have to stream those live to the public because it's a public hearing. So our expedited pardon reviews, which would, like the parole hearings, people would be able to attend and at least listen in to what the board, to the board's votes and what was transpiring. We are actually even live streaming those expedited pardon reviews as well. What has changed is the full panel hearings, which, to explain to anybody who's not been very familiar with the process, where the board is able to grant a pardon to someone without the applicant or the petitioner actually coming and appearing in front of the 3-member panel of the board. That was the expedited pardon process that you're referring to, and we can continue to do that. However, there are some cases that we can't, and specifically expedited pardons really deals with victimless crimes or crimes where there is no victim opposition. It's limited to mainly nonviolent offenses. Those other type of offenses in somebody's history, albeit 20 years ago, still would require that they physically appear in front of a 3-panel member of the board. For example, this past month, we granted 36 expedited pardons, but 22 of those cases had to be moved to a full panel. That became a problem when the court shut down for us because we had no avenue, we had no place to have these hearings. And we have unfortunately seen a large backlog every single month because we've had to continue many of those hearings based on the closures of the courts. And we completely understand that, we have to at some point try to figure out how to conduct these hearings, not knowing if, what's going to be happening with the courts. And if they slowly reopen, we still don't even know if we're going to be able to have those hearings. So we've created a bit of a backlog, but we've also come up with a solution. What we were able to do on the parole end, we came up with a short-term solution that could turn out to be a long-term solution for pardons hearings. And we have about 135 cases that we, from the past few months that we still have to have full panel hearings on. We've come up with a way to do this. We are going to be, and starting in July, we're going to be expediting, live streaming 5 pardon hearings. We've rescheduled most of these pardons hearings. Most of the petitioners who have had their cases continued have been notified. And we did this through a couple of different formats. We are going to be conducting Zoom hearings. We went out and got a professional license for Zoom, where we're able to actually get all the petitioners together. We then had to try to figure out, if we do have a Zoom meeting, how do we get the public involved? Because as our parole hearings are public, so are our pardons hearings, and members of the public, although they don't participate in the hearing, have to have the ability to actually be in the room and see the hearing, watch the hearing, etc. So utilizing Zoom and also YouTube Studio, we on July 4th are going to be doing our first live stream pardon hearing where all petitioners are going to be participating in a Zoom platform, while members of the public are going to be participating through YouTube. And their participation is going to be limited. They cannot interact, but they're going to be able to watch. And this will all be done, or will be available through a link on our website.
That's really great. I'm so glad they were able to work out a solution for the full pardons hearings. And I think, if I understand correctly, you typically would have one full pardons hearing a month in a courtroom around the state. So you haven't had any for the last 3 months. I'm assuming that's March, April, May, or no, I'm sorry, maybe you had one in March, April, May, June, but in July you're going to be having 5, so you'll be fully caught up at that point.
Absolutely.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Basically, because we've been able to schedule all these hearings in the month of July, we should be caught up with all the full panel hearings and wipe out any backlog that we've had. And that really was the main, the only backlog that was created. Everything else in terms of our operations continued on seamlessly.
That's great. Rich, I think we're running a little bit short on time here, but I just did want to squeeze in one more point. I think that in March, and this was sort of lost in the haze of the pandemic, that the board rolled out its e-pardon system. And I think that's a great step forward, allowing people to access the pardons application online. And I was hoping you could just talk a little bit about that, what that looks like, and what that means for the board and for the public.
Sure, yeah. And unfortunately, we were going to be doing a very big media blitz on our new e-pardon system, which basically allows petitioners to apply for pardons from their cell phones or their laptops or whatever electronic device they're using, instead of the old process of completely filling out paper applications, submitting all the documents to the board. And it's a system that we developed in-house with a state contracted vendor, and we're able to get up and running in less than a year. So information regarding our e-pardon system is available on our website, but really the e-pardon system has taken off in terms of increasing even applications that we've received for pardons, and also processing the applications, through a completely electronic system, very similar kind of to what Case Notes, which was previously mentioned, is for our parole side of the house. E-pardons now provide so much more information and more ease of use for not only the petitioners and the applicants, but also our staff at the board. We're going to be able to get a lot of more rich, robust data regarding individuals who are applying for pardons. Pardons is a field which across the country there's not a lot of research on. Why do people stop committing crimes? They call that desistance. It's ever emerging, ever evolving, but I think, we are one of the second states in the country to develop such a pardon system. I believe South Dakota is another. So we now have this electronic system where if somebody who has a criminal record, could be from years ago, they meet the requirements and they want to apply for a pardon, they can now do so from their phone, including uploading of documents that are required, et cetera.
That's really exciting, Rich. And I would just flag for the chair and for our research director, I think, maybe once we reconvene in the fall, it would be great to perhaps have a demonstration of this system as part of a CJPAC meeting down the road, and or, in a year or two after you start having collected, some of the data from this system, it would be really interesting to hear about what you've learned from all this new data.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely part of our plan as we start to gather information. And again, our last paper application was accepted on May 31st, which there actually wasn't any. So as of June 1st, all our applications are now electronic into our system. So I think we're going to be able to gather some data, and hopefully my Planning, Research, and Development division will be able to do a nice presentation for CJPAC in the future.
That would be great. Thank you so much, Rich, for all that information. Really appreciate it. And we look forward to continuing the conversation and hearing how these technologies are working going forward, and hearing that report out on how the e-pardon system is working. With that, I think I'll go ahead and turn the mic over to my colleague, Melissa Conway, Planning Analyst in the Criminal Justice Division at OPM. I know we heard from Rich a little bit about how the pardons and parole system, and particularly victim impact, was changed and how they addressed that during this pandemic time. And I think Melissa is going to talk with Beth Hamilton a little bit more about some of the challenges that they've faced and opportunities that they've found during this crisis. So with that, I will pass it off to Melissa. Thanks so much.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for your time today. This is Melissa Conway. I'm a planning analyst in the Criminal Justice Policy and Planning Division. I know you all often hear from the research side of our division. I'm in the policy planning and implementation side. So I just wanted to thank Beth Hamilton this morning for talking with us in more detail about the Alliance's operations during COVID. For those of you who don't know, Beth is currently the Deputy Director at the Connecticut Alliance to End Sexual Violence, and she will be moving over to the Executive Director position as of July 1st. So congratulations to you, Beth. I wanted to acknowledge the efforts that the Alliance's member centers, and other victim service providers have undertaken throughout this pandemic in order to ensure vital services, remote advocacy. I know in discussions that we've had in the past, there have been many barriers to these services, such as problems with ensuring confidentiality via teleadvocacy, access to hospital accompaniments for advocates, and other various barriers, but there have also been many successes that have come out of problem solving for those challenges and barriers. So I just wanted to invite you to share with us those barriers, but also to invite you to identify how you've developed strategies going forward in service delivery beyond COVID by problem solving for many of those barriers. So with that, I would turn it over to you, Beth.
Thank you so much, Melissa, and thank you, Mark, also for the opportunity to be here this morning. I've been taking lots of notes. I really appreciate the folks who have gone before me this morning, and all the information has been so helpful, and I've been able to take down lots of information on some of the finer points to also be able to share with our advocates statewide. I also just want to start out by saying thank you to Mark for your comments earlier. I really appreciate the way that you centered trauma in your remarks, and I think that centering of trauma really provides a good lens through which to think about the impacts of both coronavirus, but also, as you mentioned, institutionalized racism on the victims and survivors that we work with. And what I can start off by saying simply is that the survivors that we work with have been deeply impacted by both pandemics and certainly have continued to struggle with a lack of resources and other things that have made access to basic services as well as access to victim services a challenge. Overall, what we've seen is that we have continued to maintain services. We very quickly, much like many other folks who have talked about this morning and have talked in previous CJPAC meetings, we pivoted quickly to online operations and being able to provide very similar, if not the same services remotely that we would if we were operating normally in person and the pandemic was not happening. For us, what that meant is we had to really look at, as many other folks have mentioned, our technology, the software, the hardware, the sort of workflows that we had, and the ways that we could really capitalize on the use of technology to really support our work during this time has been something that, has really threaded through these last 3 months. I would also say that, to sort of set the stage to think about this, and I know that this is what other folks who work with, victims and survivors of crime, I'm guessing, are also experiencing, but survivors are struggling to meet their basic needs at this time. And I think that really can't be underscored enough because I think that has been one of the ways that folks who have experienced trauma are significantly being re-traumatized by sort of the environment right now. And, our advocates are really challenged to be able to find the resources to support them in, the other areas of their lives that they might need. So things, thinking about food and housing insecurity that's coupled with loss of employment and sometimes lack of access to healthcare, all these things have really been detrimental to many of the people we work with. And it really has required our advocates to be able to create and strengthen the networks that they have, both with systems providers like those on the call today, but also with other social service providers to really be able to meet the needs of the survivors that we're working with. As Melissa mentioned, some of our biggest challenges have included barriers to providing in-person accompaniments. We normally are in emergency departments, courts, and police departments, often with survivors as they work through, should they choose to, as they work through reporting and sort of formally going through the criminal legal system. And what we've seen is that in general advocates, there's a general diminished number. So there's a slight decrease, in the number of folks who are reaching out on our English hotline. But strangely, or maybe not strangely, what we've seen is a significant increase on our Spanish language hotline, and also a real increase in the amount of contact and support we're providing to individuals. So while the numbers may have slightly decreased, the amount of time that we're spending and the amount of needs of individual survivors that we're working with and their families has greatly increased. And so, the nice thing has been that we've been able to pivot and use technology whenever appropriate to be able to continue to provide that support. What we've seen as a challenge sometimes if we're in emergency departments or other spaces is a lack of technology in some of those systems settings. So we're able to, during this time when hospitals shut down, for example, and there were hospitals, for example, out in the Stamford, Norwalk area that were not allowing our advocates in for a significant length of time just due to the overwhelming amount of coronavirus cases. One of the things that we saw was that we were able to do accompaniments, but that there wasn't always the technology in the emergency department. So access to phones that could be used by the survivor during that accompaniment to stay in contact with the advocate throughout the duration, as would happen with an in-person accompaniment. So some of those things we're continuing to see, some challenges in terms of the amount of access that we might have in those settings. And also what we've heard from survivors is that, one, survivors are showing up less to have those kinds of forensic, evidence collection taken, but also that they are not opting in as often as they are in other settings to video or phone-based advocacy. So we're continuing now to get our folks back in emergency departments and work one-on-one with many of those systems to be able to make sure that folks have access to the appropriate amount of information to be able to provide with survivors, and then linking survivors, if they're not able to provide accompaniment, linking survivors with services directly following. We also have had challenges, as Melissa noted, with things like confidentiality. So we had to quickly pivot to using technology, and specifically things like electronically verified signatures that we didn't need to use necessarily as often in the past because we had a lot more face-to-face contact with the victims and survivors we worked with. So what we've done is really been able to use technology in those ways also to speed up the process. And the thing I can say, it sounds like with many other folks, is that an unintended consequence has been, I think what we have identified are a number of places where we'll be able to permanently incorporate access through technology to speeding up the process, to ensuring that folks have the kind of paperwork and all those things that they need. Technology has really helped that, and so that's likely something that will stay going forward. A couple of the other challenges that can sort of be threaded, also throughout and incorporated into the earlier conversation is, due to the changes and the movement within the DOC system, at times it's been a challenge, even with the online tracker system, it's been a challenge to be able to accurately track some of the survivors that we work with who are incarcerated. And so we really look forward to, some of the implementation that we heard earlier, and also an increase in access to technology on site. So things, like somebody mentioned Microsoft Teams meetings or other video conferencing, that kind of stuff would also, in a permanent capacity, would really increase access to support and advocacy for our folks to be able to support incarcerated and detained survivors. So I really look forward to, some of the other implications that folks were talking about earlier. We also, have seen the impacts of the court backlog. We know that that's both impacted directly our legal services team and our attorneys there, as well as some of the other victims and survivors that we work with throughout our membership. And what we, are really thankful for and see is that courts are starting to open back up. We're seeing more hours, we're seeing more locations, but we do anticipate, just because of that backlog, that it will take some time to be worked through and leveled off in that way. We also have had, just generally, in terms of communication, which folks have done such a great job and are such great partners on our post-conviction victim advocacy side. And this is where we have our victim advocates housed within parole and probation sex offender supervision units. And I think just generally the way that there have been skeleton crews and maybe not always the sex offender officers who are in the offices, that there at times has been a little bit of a lag with obtaining contact information for victims that we would normally be getting very quickly on site. And so folks have really been able to develop, ways to get that information. They work very collaboratively with all of those offices to be able to do it. And we're starting to see that information speed up also. So we're excited that, we're hearing lots of things about the ways in which we're all using technology and the ways in which we're really using relationships over this time. To sort of pivot to some of the ways that we've adapted, I think that as everyone else, we've used technology, we've implemented and found, all the hardware, software, and certainly policies. We've certainly had to look at and change a number of policies in the ways that we do our work. We also, as I mentioned, have just really found that our relationships with our external partners have been significantly strengthened over these past months. The way I was mentioning earlier that we might, be working with somebody in a parole or probation office who might not normally be working with one of our advocates, we've also then been able to work with chiefs or work with other folks to say, okay, here's exactly on this day, here's who's going to be in, here's how we get that information to you. And so we've really created informal systems that are working very, very well to sort of be conduits for flows of information across systems and across agencies. We also have forged new relationships with community partners we have never worked with before. So I can think about, for example, the anti-hunger community. We have not historically had at the coalition level, a huge amount of interaction with these communities, although our advocates and our programs certainly do. But we more and more are, making sure that we are getting the information that is helpful to them, that we are able to get information that's helpful to the survivors that they're working with. And certainly one of the things that has also increased is a request for cross-training from our center and from our centers and from our coalition here. I think there's a real recognition that many folks were already working with victims and survivors of sexual violence. But I do think that, again, sort of going back to that increased level of trauma that folks are experiencing, it is sort of it's coming up more and more for folks. And so it's been really, really hopeful for us to see the ways in which community partners and other agencies are really stepping up to be able to honor, the trauma that folks are experiencing, but also then to identify ways to really support them within the systems that they're already working within. One of the ways I can think of also sort of going forward that we're thinking about implementing, strategies that are working now is that many of our programs normally might have, for example, support groups that are running. We provide one-on-one crisis counseling to individuals and their families. We also do support groups, and those tend to be topical based, or sometimes they revolve around non-traditional healing modalities, so things like trauma-informed yoga or art-based therapy, music therapy, those things. And one of the sort of unintended side effects of all of this has been a real increase in the number of victims and survivors who are opting into support groups and counseling sessions. And we've seen a number of folks who have said, I love this format. This format works so well for me. I don't have to worry about the travel time. I can work this into my day, as I'm working or caring for my children. And so, what we have really thought about are what are ways that we can permanently, keep in place the things that are really working right now. And how do we, even as we return back to our offices, how do we keep alive, the ways in which those survivors have found solace and comfort in the remote ways that they've been able to access services and support. And so I really do anticipate that, as many other folks, as the gentleman who was just talking before me talked about, the ways in which there will be a permanent addition of, a way to remotely access those hearings. It's the same way that we're thinking about our work, that it really is, it is something that has come out as a real positive, and there are ways that we know we will definitely be able to reach more folks using technology. We also will be we'll be rolling out over the next year a talk-to-text platform. What this will really enable us to do is increase access to advocacy, information, and services to survivors who may prefer to reach out in this way. I'm somebody, even with my own mother, I do not talk to my mother. I don't talk to anybody on the phone, I text. And for me, if I think about the ways that I would, and I have a lot of privilege, I have a lot of ways to access resources and important information, I would be somebody who would opt into this. But we also know, research shows us that youth, many folks with disabilities, and many people without access to additional technology are more likely to opt into texting as a method of communication. So we absolutely know that this will increase our reach statewide. And we also know that, when folks are quarantined, privacy is diminished. There is more work, quote unquote, happening within the home on all fronts, whether that's caretaking or that is, work that we all do 9 to 5. But what we know is that time and space and privacy are really at a premium, and this talk-to-text platform will really help us also be able to reach, additional survivors in this way. And then I think sort of at a systems-based level.
I just wanted to interrupt you quickly on that point. I know that earlier you had mentioned that there was an increase in the calls to the Spanish hotline. And so I was wondering if you had any further insights into that and how that might tie into the talk-to-text platform and further reaching underserved, unserved, and unrepresented populations of survivors and victims of sexual assault through the talk-to-text platform. And if you could touch on that piece a little bit.
Absolutely. So we generally see our English hotline is significantly more active than our Spanish language hotline. And so what we've seen is about double the amount of calls over the past 3 months on our Spanish language hotline than we might normally see. And the interesting thing is folks are, historically we get a lot of calls on that hotline for things outside of sexual violence, quite frankly. I think because it's a Spanish language hotline, we get calls for other, links to other social service providers, or sometimes it's even court-based operations or things like that. And it's been interesting to see that all of the calls have been, exclusively from victims and survivors of sexual violence. And I think that, there's been so much happening both in terms of immigration and other pieces that there's just so much both fear about reporting and fear about how folks move through systems with so much sort of happening and so much uncertainty right now. And so a lot of the calls that we have received have been around those very specific issues. We have an advocate team, a whole bilingual advocate team. So we have bilingual advocates at all of our member centers throughout the state. And those are the folks that respond to that hotline. And the other thing that they're sort of seeing in the community is an increase in activity, or an increase in the partnerships and the collaboration that they have also with community-based organizations who are serving Latinx and Spanish-speaking survivors. And so I think that part of it might also just be we've done a significant amount of outreach to different communities. We've made sure that we have a lot of Spanish language information that folks can distill out and push out into communities. And I think we're sort of seeing the ripple effects of some of that outreach and just some of the extended partnerships that we have during this time. So folks know more about the hotline. I think they're sort of opting in to be able to link up to our services in that way more. And then Melissa, to your other question, around talk to text, it's absolutely something that we are talking about, the ways in which we would include at least Spanish language options for folks, and an ability to link up directly with some of our bilingual advocates, through that process. So while we're in the early stages of planning and are not quite an implementation stage yet, what we're really excited about is we are thinking through that. And what we also, would contend, and I would just say just anecdotally, we think we'll see the same exact thing on the talk to text that we're seeing now in terms of the Spanish language piece in particular, which is that we would see more folks opting into that kind of both informal but certainly anonymous type way of communicating with our advocates. Does that help to answer your question, Melissa?
Yes. And I'm sorry for cutting you off earlier. I just wanted to tie those 2 points together. And going forward with that point, I just wanted to think about how the talk to text platform might help with preparation for a potential future surge in COVID cases and ensuring advocacy. And if you have any further thoughts on preparations going forward. I know we're pressed for time. We only have a couple more minutes, but I wanted to make sure I got that point in.
Absolutely. So it will surely set us up for success to have another option, another way for services, information, and support to be accessible to folks. Other states, have done this. We have other hotlines like this, other platforms like this within our state that have been certainly very successful. And I think that, one of the other things that will be really nice about the Talk to Text platform is that it also builds in an additional layer of communication and infrastructure. So one of the things that we hope to do, for example, is to be able to have, both live response, certainly, but also folks responding on a network of cell phones. And this will really help us, this will be an additional layer of, giving us an ability, to communicate statewide. And I think that, what that will also do going forward is really make it so that folks are very quickly able to be responded to, that we're able to, from an initial point of access, maybe through that texting, we're able to then on the back end work with our advocates and our membership to be able to identify resources and quickly get those resources out. I think it will really increase our turnaround time not increase, it will diminish our turnaround time, and will make it so that we are able to really provide quick and timely responses to folks in a new and just much more comprehensive way than we've been able to in the past.
Great, thank you. Well, just about 2 more minutes. I just want to see if you had anything else to share with the group. And if not, then I'll turn it back over to you, Mark. And I just thank you, Beth, for taking the time for talking with us today. And again, for all the services that the Alliance the member centers and the advocates have been continuing forward with throughout this pandemic.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I would say that, just leaving the conversation, we are so looking forward to the ways in which we'll continue to partner with DOC, with CSSC, with judicial branch, with other folks to really be able to use technology, as was discussed earlier, to support access to systems for victims and survivors of crime. So we really look forward to being able to help in those implementations, to troubleshoot things and really be real partners in that work. So thank you so much for the opportunity. And we're, so excited about all the work we've heard about today.
Terrific. This is
Mark, I'll turn that back over to you.
Thank you, Melissa, and thank you, Kyle, and thank you, Eleanor, for all the really compelling issues that you brought to life through your conversations with the with the Department of Correction, the Board of Pardons and Paroles, and the Alliance to End Sexual Violence. Hearing from Director Galligan, Director Ellison, Director Sparacco, and Beth Hamilton was incredibly powerful to me to reflect on all that your agencies and organizations have done since the onset of the public health emergency. And I imagine if I could see the other members of CJPAC or look out to the individuals following along, they are taking copious notes, just as you described, Beth, and taking those back to reflect and compare against the responses that have been applied from other organizations and agencies, and especially as part of brainstorming efforts, preparation, contingency planning, and looking ahead to the future. I was struck by Beth's remarks regarding the basic needs and how basic needs of the people that our agencies and organizations serve were becoming more fraught with each passing day of this period. And in some of my conversations with Beth, she emphasized the impact of homelessness and housing insecurity, unemployment, imminent loss of housing, transportation, being added on top of issues of trauma, issues of victimization, issues of involvement in the criminal justice system. And so I hope that this gives some greater sense of partnership and collective action, that we all are, as part of a state, as part of a system, as part of a community and agency partnership, to moving forward. I think one thing that I would add in closing is that none of what I've heard suggests that anyone believes it can be done alone in isolation, that it's partnerships and working together through this is what brought us to the point where we are now as a state. We have just under 20 minutes, or it's about 20 minutes for updates, and I'm at fault for reducing the amount, leaving limited time. I think that our Q&A discussion kept right on time, but it was I who caused a late start and probably took moments of personal privilege, but I thought they were important. I was going to try to give a move around through the group to ask for updates, and indeed ask you to please feel free to share any written updates that you don't feel you're able to get to verbally on our call, and we'll add it to the minutes that we'll bring out at our next meeting for review. And please, if you can, try to keep focus on the most salient updates you can, just so we can allow everyone to get brought in. Attorney Rapillo, if you don't mind, I'd like to start with you and then move to Karen Jarmock after that. Attorney Rapillo, I was thinking of you and the partnership between public defenders and the Board of Pardons with the parole violation hearings. That was one of the other topics we had on the slate before the March meeting was canceled. So as Rich was giving his update, I thought of you, and it's another agenda item to cover in the fall. But I'll let you have the floor, ma'am, if you're still with us, for a chance to give an update from your division, and thank you.
No, I'm still here. Yeah, actually, the work of our parole revocation unit really went on unimpeded during the pandemic because of all the video conferencing. They're physically located in the same building as the board. So that was one of the areas in our agency where the work really wasn't impacted very much by the pandemic. We continue to move in step with the judicial branch as they roll out increased court operations. We have adapted to that. Continue to try to work to have more cases heard on dockets, to work with the prosecutor's offices to identify matters with a priority on incarcerated individuals to try to move existing cases through the dockets and begin to get cases resolved and move people back into their lives. We're hoping to start to be able to do that with cases that were pending prior to the shutdown for folks that were not incarcerated as well. Like everyone, we're struggling with figuring out how to bring staff back into offices safely. Our ability to use technology in the courthouses is pretty restricted. There's not good Wi-Fi, there's not excellent ways to run new equipment, but we've been adapting and working on it, and so far everything seems to be working. And we sort of look forward to operations continuing to be expanded and bringing our people back to work.
Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate that very much. Karen, can I turn to you next, please? And then after you, I think I'll turn to Commissioner Sadi.
Sure. Thank you very much, everyone. And this has been really informative and helpful. On the domestic violence advocacy side of the work, we've understandably been tracking throughout the pandemic data so that we can be responsive to trends and the needs of survivors. In terms of CT Safe Connect, which is the central point of contact, just one phone number or one opportunity, whether you want to text, email, or live chat with an advocate, bilingual, bicultural, 24/7. We are viewing, in particular in the month of May, that 62% of the people, individuals who were reaching out for help had never previously sought services. As you can imagine, we are viewing that the activity within calls for service continues to drop, which has been when we were hearing the information earlier this morning, it seems to be a consistent circumstance statewide. But what's concerning on our end is that while calls for service to law enforcement have decreased, there's been a 29% increase in the lethality assessment screening calls from law enforcement, and that's when a victim at the scene of an incident is at high risk for homicide. So we are actively working to view that challenge. As many of you know, the governor, through executive order on April 6th, allowed for online restraining order applications. We have pushed out the idea of CT Safe Connect, helping victims and survivors file those applications. More than 100 have been filed through that mechanism through CT Safe Connect. We also offered, and they accepted, to the judicial branch to work with marshals on the service of that order. Normally it is clerks who are doing that process, but given the pandemic and the threat, we took that on, and that's going very well. And on the advocacy side, within the domestic violence sites, there's been a 23% increase in incoming and outgoing calls. As you can imagine, with remote advocacy, there has been heightened activity within each of the sites. What I will also say is that while shelters are at capacity, we're still at 118% across the board, given that we are housing a number of victims and survivors in hotels so that we don't have overflow in shelters during the pandemic. And finally, what I will say is that we are doing a couple of things around lessons learned during the pandemic. We are producing, and we will be offering a lessons learned document around how we shifted to remote advocacy and what that meant statewide in terms of services to victims of domestic violence. We're looking at this online restraining order process and how Safe Connect adjusted to be able to assist with that, as well as the 18 member organization sites and how well or well not that worked. We're looking at the experience of children in our shelters, particularly children of color, to understand from their point of view what their experience is in domestic violence shelters and how that can be strengthened and improved, but then lifted up in terms of what does work well for these young people. And finally, what I will say is related to the restraining order work that we're doing, we're working with the National Council for Juvenile and Family Court Judges to take a look at the drop in restraining order applications during the pandemic. It's nearly 40% in Connecticut for where we're seeing fewer and fewer victims who are accessing a restraining order, ex parte order process. And we're looking at other states to see if they experience the same thing. So all of those reports will be issued by the end of the summer. Thank you.
Terrific, Karen. Thank you very much. And I know we're looking at a fall CJPAC meeting to cover some new data analysis issues. We got to touch on it with the lethality assessment program, and there's more data to come. So it's a pleasure to partner with your coalition, and looking forward to landing on a date in the fall or winter, I suppose, even for that discussion. Thank you very much. And I'll turn to Commissioner Sadi, and after him, I'll ask the judicial branch. I know that Judge Carroll and Director Roberge had a conflict at the beginning. I think they're on the line, though. I'll turn to the Commissioner. Commissioner Sadi?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My thanks to so many of you who are on this call and your help throughout the pandemic, helping the Department of Veterans Affairs and collaborating. The Unified Command calls were an amazing team effort, and so kudos to so many people around and on this call. With regard to lessons learned, as well as the access to programs and services that previous speakers mentioned, and looking at that from a lessons learned at the DVA, but I've told my staff is, and for so many of us on this call, we never closed. We were always open, but I think what happened is many of our programs either limited or ceased the access to new clients coming in unless it was an urgent or an exception to policy. An example of that is in our skilled nursing facility, as well as our family homes and our residential program at the DVA, we ceased new admissions. Except for in very limited circumstances. So what I'm looking at in our quote reopen or reaccess plans is making sure that we have in place a system where we will not need to, should there be a second wave of this pandemic or future pandemics or other health emergencies, where we will not need to cease or suspend admissions, because it is those individuals who need those programs and services. They're the ones most in need, and oftentimes affected disproportionately in a pandemic like this, particularly those of limited income and communities of color who access our state programs and services and are disproportionately impacted. So that's one of our big lessons learned, and I just want to underscore that to those on this call, that the DVA skilled nursing facility, our residential facility for individual veterans, and our family homes for veterans with dependents are all open for admissions. We do take on individuals who have gone through the criminal justice system, and we are happy to work with individuals leading up to release, whether it's from DOC or from a halfway house, and to get their files and their applications in the pipeline so that when they are in full release setting or status, that they could move seamlessly to our programs and services, and then we can move them to permanent community-based housing. With that, I'm more than happy to address any questions. And again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and all of those on this call for all your work over the last several months and your continued hard work for citizens of our state.
Thank you, Commissioner. Your update reminds me of the discussions we were having in the early part of the year prior to your deployment and then prior to the onset of the public health emergency, and reminds me of the benefit we have in focusing some of our discussions in the fall and winter on intersections between Veterans Affairs and different systems, behavioral health, corrections, and more. I remember the kind of impact of the discussion about efforts within the Public Defender's Office to identify people who have served as part of their outreach. So it looks like we have a lot of opportunities in the future, and great to hear your voice, and so happy you're back with us, sir. On the judicial branch side, I'm not sure Judge Carroll or Gary are with us at the moment. I want to invite them to weigh in if they are, and then after that, I'll ask Chief Kenny to speak.
I'm here, Mark. This is Judge Carroll. I'm going to be brief because both Gary and I have another conference call scheduled for 11 o'clock. I just want to highlight we've made extraordinary progress in establishing an infrastructure to remotely handle so many processes within the judicial branch, including the review and execution of search and arrest warrants and probable cause findings by judges, the remote filing of domestic violence temporary restraining order applications, remote pre-trials. Yesterday, we conducted our first remote plea hearings on a virtual platform that integrates seamlessly with our digital audio recording system. So all of these proceedings are not only on video, they are also on the record and part of the court's permanent record. Although I know that there have been some voices out there who have been clamoring for us to do more and more in physical courtrooms, I think that we have to be responsible. We have to take every measure we possibly can to mitigate the spread of the virus and do everything we can to keep all of our employees who are working in our physical facilities, all members of the public who may venture into them, as safe and protected as possible. And of necessity, to comply with public health guidance, most of those proceedings must be, at least for the short term, virtual and remote. And we're going to continue to do that. I don't think we have any other alternatives, any realistic alternatives. I should also make note of the fact that from the outset of the crisis, we have had what I would characterize as remarkable collaboration with our partners in the criminal justice system, especially with the Division of Criminal Justice, Rich Colangelo, and the Division of Public Defender Services, Chris Rapillo, and very significantly with DOC and Commissioner Cook. And I wasn't present for your opening comments, Mark, but I too would like to add my voice of good wishes and thanks to Commissioner Cook for the remarkable job that he's done here with the Department of Correction in the very short period of time that he was with us. He too proved to be an invaluable collaborative partner as we tried to come up with unique solutions to the challenges we faced when the COVID-19 crisis broke, and Commissioner Cook could not have been more cooperative. I wish him well. He'll be sorely missed, and I can't say enough about him and his efforts while he was here. At this point, I'll turn it over to Gary for his update.
Okay, thanks, Judge Carroll. Good morning, everybody. And I don't have a lot on top of what Judge Carroll said. We've really been focused in the branch on getting the virtual courtrooms up and running. And as Judge Carroll noted, we had disposition hearings or dockets yesterday in 4 court locations around the state, and we have some going on today. In a couple of weeks, there'll be a dedicated virtual courtroom line for adult criminals, so we'll be able to expand business. And again, talking with the Chief State's Attorney's Office and the Chief Public Defender's Office, working out processes to identify cases that can go to disposition rather quickly. And I just also want to thank Department of Correction for their work in establishing these additional virtual sites in their pretrial facilities right now. That's where we started in Hartford, Bridgeport, New Haven. We have Corrigan, Garner, New York will be up next, and it's helping us out tremendously. So thank you to Commissioner Cook, Acting Commissioner Quiros, and Dave Maiga, Director of Population Management, has been great with your IT folks in DOC. So can't thank you enough for that. We have the 13 courts that will be open to the public starting next Monday, and we have all of our staff rotating into those courts doing business. Our probation offices are open and doing business as they have been throughout the pandemic, and we continue to work with our community providers to expand services there for clients who need services through our ABH and our Alternative in the Community program. So we're making a lot of progress of moving forward in the branch, but as Judge Carroll stated, first and foremost is our the public and our staff's health and safety, and I think we've been doing a good job of that as well. So look forward to making more progress in the weeks to come before our next meeting, and if there's any questions, I'd be glad to field some. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Judge. Thank you, Gary. As I said, I would turn next to Chief Kinney for an update, and after the Chief, I will turn to Acting Commissioner Quiros. I know that I acknowledge the leadership transition happening in the DOC, and as did the Judge and Gary, so I would like to hear from the Acting Commissioner after the Chief. Chief Kinney, if you wouldn't mind going next, please, sir. Okay. Maybe the Chief is having some audio issues. It's okay, Acting Commissioner Quiros, I'll turn to you next, and I can circle back to the Chief later. Make sure, if you're still on the line, Acting
Thank
Commissioner
you, Mark.
Quiros.
Thank you, Mark. So on June 12th, around 4:30, a governor's press release came out with Commissioner Cook stepping down from the Department of Correction. For some, it was a surprise. For others, it was a shock. Sad, but for his inner circle, the individual that spent the most time with him, we knew it was coming. His plan to bring the family down to Connecticut didn't happen. Lost his father during the winter around Christmas time, and when he came back in January, it was just totally different man. Missed his family, was having a hard time. Then COVID hit. struggle during the COVID time, and just realized that during COVID, his team, when I say his team, the executive team, spend 12 to 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. And when at the end of the shift, many of us went home to our loved ones to cook meals, and Commissioner Cook went home to a one-bedroom condo by himself. So he struggled with it. Very happy to say that he's back at Utah as of yesterday with his family. Had a conversation with him last night, and he's very happy to be back with the family, and the family is very happy, especially his older mother is very happy to have him back. A great leader, a great mentor, a great friend, and just a great person overall who really cared for his staff, who really cares for corrections, who really cares for those collaborations with everybody in the court system, outside law enforcement, victim advocacy groups, and for staff, a big heart. So we're definitely going to miss him. For many of us on this team, it's just a phone call away, to get back in contact with him, but he will be missed. As far as an agency update, Mark, we continue record low population counts. Credits due to the front and back end of the system and the collaboration that we've built that everybody's been talking about in the system. Today's count is at 10,037. By the end of the weekend, we will be under 10,000. This is the first time since the late 80s that we've been at that mark. As far as DOC, we just finished our first round of mass testing for the offender population. 12% of our population tested positive for asymptomatic. We're getting ready to start the mass testing for staff and offenders. And the goal is we're going to continue to test until we reach 0% for both staff and offenders. And then I will end by saying that we're in the beginning process of our demobilization plan to start returning back to the new normal in corrections. And that is all I got, Mark.
Thank you, Acting Commissioner. I appreciate your update, and your words are felt on my heart. And I think it's hearing from the DOC leadership team today really helped to boost our spirits a bit. And I think that's a reflection of a legacy that a leader brings. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Mark.
I did hear that unfortunately Vinny Russo from DCF had to sign off, and if others have to because of 11 o'clock conflicts, I again apologize for my poor time management skills. I will turn to Dr. Cho next, if that's okay, and then from there I will go to Dr. Norco, if that's okay. Dr. Cho, are you on the line?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I'll try to be very brief. I know we're running over time. I just want to echo my thanks to Commissioner Cook for his service to the state of Connecticut, and in particular for what he's done to try to prioritize housing options for people who are discharged from prisons, which has been a priority that he stated from day one, and also put some his own commitment and advocated for having state resources to put behind the reentry housing program that we were able to create using JAG funds from OPM over the last couple of months. I want to just maybe quickly highlight some of the brief stats that can share some of the results of that DOC Reentry Housing Assistance Program that we've been able to stand up in partnership with DOC and OPM, as well as the judicial branch, which is serving people who are hitting their end of sentence and are being released who have no other housing option. And by the way, just want to point out this is a population that legally and technically DOC doesn't even have purview over. So the fact that there's concern about the post-incarceration housing needs of this population, I think just is a testament to the fact that there is a compassionate approach, that people do care what happens after they're no longer under custody. I know we've had over 80 referrals from DOC for this program, but I have in front of me a slide chart that my Deputy Director, Dr. Mimi Haley, put together that just provides a quick snapshot of what the outcomes are for the first 68 people who were referred between April 1st and May 15th. So this is just for the first 68 people. Roughly half of them were people who were discharged at the end of sentence, but actually 50% of them were on probation at the time of their release. The demographics largely correspond to the DOC population, very overrepresented by people of color, Black and Hispanic populations, and majority of the people are in the age range of in their late 40s. Over time, at the beginning, these are folks who were released. We were given not many more than a few days before they were released in terms of trying to have to refer them to our provider communities. But over time, as we've worked out some of the kinks with this program, DOC started to provide referrals far in advance. Currently, DOC is actually referring people over 20 days prior to their release, which gives us a little bit more head time to give to our providers that we're working with. Also note, a majority of them have significant mental health, medical, and substance use needs, as indicated by the DOC scores. Vast majority of them, over half of them, have mental health needs of score of 3 or higher. Half of them have medical needs of 3 or higher, but actually 90% of them actually have a drug and alcohol use score that's 3 or higher. So we're talking about a population that has significant needs. Fortunately, a majority of them, 90%, are actually discharged and have a DSS number, meaning that they have access to Medicaid and healthcare coverage. We also found that about 2/3 of them have a previous record with our homeless management information system. So these are folks who are likely on a revolving door between DOC and homelessness. So 2/3 of them are people who had a prior episode of homelessness, are now in DOC and are again being released back to homelessness. We have, for 71% of the first initial cohort of 68 people, have identified housing solutions for them, which could be a combination of CSSD housing or DMIS housing, or in some cases, permanent private rental market housing that we were able to help subsidize using these resources. The other 21% are in the process of actually securing housing, but are currently in temporary housing. And then 8% have actually declined assistance. So I think we're seeing some promising results. We are able to move people fairly quickly into stable housing. And I think it's a real testament to the collaboration that we've been able to stand up, not only with the number of nonprofit providers across the state, but also with OPM and DOC and CSSD and the judicial branch. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Looking forward to more data coming in on the Housing Assistance Partnership, perhaps in the fall or winter. Appreciate it. Dr. Norco, and then after you, I thought I would ask Attorney Colangelo and then Lori Deneen to go after you. Dr. Norco, you're next up if you're still on the line.
Yes, I am. Good morning. Very quickly, DMIS continues to roll out its COVID testing. A number of facilities have completed voluntary testing. Some are in the process now, and the rest will soon be on the way. Also, in response to the governor's recent order, we will be transitioning to mandatory testing for some of the facilities that deal with certain populations. Good news at CVH, the last new positive patient was confirmed on May 6th. And at Whiting, the last patient confirmed was on April 21st. So right now, that's not a problem for our inpatient population. Significantly, DMIS recently received a SAMHSA COVID grant for $2 million. These funds are going to be used to purchase telehealth equipment in DMIS and DOC. There's money for United Way, 211, there's money for the Department of Children and Families, and money to address pandemic-related mental health care needs of specific populations that have been most affected by the disease. In terms of collaboration with judicial, that's been going very well. Our work at Whiting with competency restoration has continued. There have now been 43 cases that have been resolved that were sent to Whiting for restoration. During the pandemic, 39 of them were discharged from the hospital and to the community, with 32 of them right to the community. Some were returned to DOC because they were still on bond. And there's another group that we're still waiting to get word about the resolution of their case, who were found competent. We had a behavioral health subcommittee meeting in early June. DOC, CSC, DMIS were largely talking about how we were going to continue our collaborations and expand them. So, for example, we're looking to the fact that there are a number of cases, there are actually close to 150 cases of competency restoration evaluations that are in some state of stasis at this point. And we're expecting that many of those are going to get reordered in the next few weeks. We know that the hearing dates for those are set late this month and early next month, and then continuing. So we're trying to expand. We've been collaborating with Dr. Burns in DOC to make arrangements to evaluate pretrial detainees for these evaluations using video conferencing. We're also starting to work with judicial about how we're going to conduct jail diversion using video conferencing to both do the screening of the defendants as well as the testimony in the courts. So there's a lot of collaborations to be accomplished as we're all beginning to get back to larger scale operations, and we're hoping that we'll all be moving forward roughly in parallel so that we'll get this done in an efficient way. That's all.
Okay, Dr. Norco, thank you very much for your update, and we look forward to addressing any changes to the May minutes as needed. Thank you, sir. Attorney Colangelo, and then after you, Lori Deneen, please.
In the interest of time, Mark, nothing new here. We're good.
Okay, sir. Thank you, and please feel free to share anything you wish to in writing. I know there's a.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. Sorry for my poor time management today. Ms. Deneen?
Hi, everyone. I do not have anything to add. Just as always, impressed by how everyone's handling everything, especially given the current circumstances on all levels, all around. So thank you.
We're so glad you're. Oh, sorry. And best wishes to you, ma'am. Thank you very much. Stay safe and be well. Thank you. John Frasnelli from SDE, are you still on the line, sir? I know other commitments, and I'm not sure if you're still with us, but if you are. Yes, sir. Okay, terrific. Thank you.
Sure. Just real quickly, the department is in the process of putting out and finalizing the reopening guidance for schools, as you're aware. We've also provided a number of behavioral, mental health, and social emotional webinars and training for districts during the closure. That's ongoing. A couple of things I wanted to highlight. One is I want to thank the Judicial Branch Office of Victim Services and Karen Jarmuck at the Connecticut Coalition Against Domestic Violence. We will be issuing a joint memo out to superintendents hopefully next week that provides the details on what Karen was speaking to and information on resources for families around domestic violence. So appreciate their partnership on that. And finally, I just want to add my admiration to Commissioner Cook. He will be sorely missed. I've enjoyed getting to know him and working with him. And he's just a tremendous person, professional, and leader in this work. So thanks for the opportunity, Mark.
Oh, thank you, John. We're so thrilled you're here. Thank you for your participation. And I still remember the SDE presentation from, I think, February on school discipline. It was a terrific presentation. I'm going to just mention Humayun Beg, Director Beg said that he shared his update with me. I'm going to run through it. And I know Attorney Pierre had some issues earlier on with the audio, so I'll let her prepare to speak next if she can. Otherwise, I can mention a victim issue subcommittee meeting. But Director Beg shared that as a technology organization, they have not had any impact on their operations due to the pandemic. They're working very hard with Judicial to ease implementation of the court document exchange. They're in the process of connecting criminal justice agency systems together through SIS for electronic information flow, beginning with GA9, which Attorney Colangelo knows much about. DCJ, Judicial, and police departments are testing, and in August, they'll be doing some final testing and bringing all systems online for GA9 and developing plans for deployment to other GAs. They're also working with the Connecticut Sentencing Commission and on other projects with the prosecutor data and IMRP on use of force reporting. Natasha Pierre, I'm not sure if you were on the line. I know you had some technical issues, but I want to give you a chance to speak if you are. I would, if she's not able to join, I did want to share that we had a CJPAC Victim Issues Subcommittee meeting on Tuesday, And we were so fortunate to be joined by many agencies that serve on CJPAC, from the Board of Pardons to the DOC to the Judicial Branch, to the Division of Criminal Justice, the Division of the Public Defender Services, DESP, to hear from victims and survivors and the organizations that serve them. So the Alliance, the Coalition to End Domestic Violence, MAD, Survivors of Homicide, and more. We're on a 2-hour, hour and a half plus call to talk about COVID response and planning. It was a really thoughtful meeting, and so grateful to Natasha for making that happen. I think we have two left, Rich, Director Sparacco, and Beth Hamilton. I know you shared a lot of information earlier, and we'd be eager to hear any additional updates you have, but thank you so much for your participation today and all the insights you shared. I'll begin with Director Sparacco and then to Ms. Hamilton, if I could.
Great, Mark. Thanks. And just briefly, numbers are reported out in the monthly indicators. I did want to highlight, our grant rate jumped on parole up to 67%, and our transfer parole reviews continue. We did another 37 of those. That's a result of the automatic reviews put into play by the chairman for immediate approval of any nonviolent offender granted release. It's also a result of a memo to the chair, from the chair to all the board members regarding, COVID-19 as a mitigating factor for all releases. I mentioned previously that we had 4 pardons hearings coming up. Those hearings are July 1st, July 20th, July 21st, and July 29th. Again, anybody seeking information about those hearings or any of our hearings that occur every single day or any board meetings can go to our website at ct.gov/BOPP. I didn't mention really any, medical or compassionate parole. I know that has been a hot topic. We talked about that at the last CJPAC meeting. The chair addressed it. We did an additional 10 approvals for medical and compassionate parole and continue to review those. An application is available on our website for anybody outside of the Department of Correction who wants to submit a review for anyone who's incarcerated for medical and compassionate. And just lastly, on a note, both the chair, myself, and the board wish the best for Commissioner Cook. Although he's not present today, we completely understand his decision, how hard it must be, and we totally agree with family first and wish him the best of luck.
Thank you. Thank you for your update, Director, and those sentiments are shared by me as well. Beth, sorry, thank you so much for your patience, and thank you again for your presentation you gave earlier on our call. If you're with us, I'd be grateful for any other updates you might have.
Hi, Mark. This is Melissa. Beth just messaged me to let me know she had to jump off and just said thank you for the opportunity.
Understood, and again, reminder of my poor time management on the call. And I would also like to note that Commissioner Ravella, just for reflecting in the minutes, he was on this call. He had audio issues, but he followed along and did contact me to let me know, and we'll reflect his presence in the minutes. Anyone else on that call wish to provide an update or speak? Well, we do have a 2-month hiatus coming up. I think September 24th, Thursday, September 24th is when we'll be next together. I will be using that time to reflect on my time management and work on improving that. But I'll also do it to reflect on changes to bring to the commission so that we come back with a even more effective group in the fall. And this has been a learning process for me, and these last 3 meetings have been, I think, the most powerful for me to be part of due to the voices shared regarding the response to the COVID-19 public health emergency. So I think there's a lot that I learned from this, and looking forward to September when we resume our operations. In the meantime, I want to wish everyone, if they're able to take some time to unplug a bit, to enjoy time with friends and family. I hope that you do, and I wish you all the best safety and health and wellness during the interim, and I will see you all in September. Thanks again, and be well.
Have a good day, everybody.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you.